everybody. It's great to have you here. My name is J.P. Clancy. I'm the Senior Vice President for Clinical Research for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. No mic. This mic's not working? Oh, I just got to get a little closer. All right. Well, I will go to that mic in just a minute, but I just wanted to quickly introduce myself and my teammate. And, oh, you have your own microphone. There you go.
Is this on? This one's on? Yes, okay. I am Katie Howe. I am the Clinical Trial Navigator for the CF Foundation, and will be presenting with Dr. Clancy this morning.
Now, just to keep it complicated, I'm going to keep moving microphones every 1 to 2 minutes, so make sure you're on your toes. But thank you for being here. I have one basic question to ask everybody. Are you satisfied with where we are with CF research and care? Are you satisfied? No. Thank you. All right, that's a simple answer. I hope that people...
Come up with a cure?
You know, let me present, and you tell me how close we're getting. How does that sound? All right, because I'm an optimist, I guess, and I see reasons for optimism. So let me just get started there. And again, that's us. And so before we got going, obviously I just mentioned what I do professionally. But my first job, I worked at a dog kennel at age 13, and my job was from 9 to 12 was to scoop for 3 hours, and I got $3 an hour, so I walked away with $9 in my pocket every day. And then I went on to a Mexican restaurant, and you can see all the other different things that I did, all in Iowa City, Iowa, where I grew up. And foolishly or not, I am a fervent Iowa Hawkeye fan, be it men's football, women's basketball. I was in my Caitlin Clark jersey last night. So anyway, if you wanna get my attention, just mention anything Hawkeyes. So. Today we're going to really talk about sort of three general areas. I'm going to give you an update on our drug development pipeline, and that's or new therapies, trying to bring new therapies to people with CF. We're also going to talk a little bit about what I'm going to call our clinical research pipeline. And I know that Mike mentioned this yesterday and showed a slide that I'll be showing again, but it really shows above and beyond what we're doing just to develop new therapies is really better understanding how to take care of people with CF, using either therapies we have or bringing therapies that are on the market to new populations. And so it's not the thing that drug companies support. This is the kind of things that CF Foundation dollars, honestly, are primarily supporting. And then I'm going to pass it on to Katie, who's going to really talk about how we can connect people with clinical trials. And it really goes back to that original question. Are we satisfied with where we are? And if we're not, then we need to do clinical research to answer some of these really important questions. So you've probably seen something along the lines of this many times, many presentations, and this is our drug development or therapeutic development pipeline. These are basically all the different programs that the CF Foundation is either directly or indirectly supporting that are trying to bring new treatments to people with CF. And as you move along the different bars, the left side, I guess, is that your left? Yes, it's your left, okay. Genetic-based therapies, obviously that's a big area and there's lots of nuance there, but I'll dig in a little bit about that. But this is really trying to advance transformative therapies to the lungs for everybody and ultimately curative therapies for everybody with CF. So that's kind of that area in that kind of bluish color. And the height of the bar is how far along we are. If it's kind of if it's a small bar, it's in the lab. As the bars get bigger, it's further in clinical development. You can see also as you move over, new modulators, some of that was discussed a bit yesterday about some next generation modulators, which are improvements on the current ones, and then areas that are CF manifestations, treating problems like inflammation, infection, new enzymes, CF-related diabetes. And so, again, we've sort of captured them by different colors there. And I'm going to try to touch at least a little bit on pretty much every area, just so people get a sense of that. But I'm more than happy to take deeper questions at our Q&A part. So when we look at the nucleic acid-based therapy pipeline, these are the programs that are currently in clinical trials that are approved by our research network called the TDN. And there are sort of three flavors. One is mRNA programs. These are all trying to provide a short, transient copy of CFTR to airway cells. And they're all, they've got similarities and differences, but they all sort of fall into that general bucket. These are types of things you'd probably have to inhale maybe daily to 2 to 3 times a week. down below that, and I'll show some data in a little bit, is a very sort of niche approach. It's called an ASO, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's for a very rare mutation, but it's also going to tell us a lot about that I think is going to follow on apply to other CF-causing mutations, and I'll share that in just a minute. And then we have what are called these gene addition approaches, and again, I'll talk a little bit about those, but each one has its nuances, and the point is we have a lot of shots on goal, and we're kind of at the moment right now of learning which of these different strategies is going to get traction, which is the one, which one or two has the chance to sort of move us forward into a later phase study. And I think the other point is they're also telling us which of these strategies make sense for curative therapies, which one of these can actually carry different cargo that can actually go and fix the CF causing problem in a person's genes. So even though right now it's not gene editing, it's telling us which way in the future we should be trying to tackle that problem. And then finally, just to give you some numbers that really demonstrate how some of the challenges, if we look at the number of folks who are adults with CF who are not modulator eligible. And a caveat to that is there's at least as many people who are modulator eligible and not able to take it because they have side effects or don't tolerate it. But the numbers are not very big. We're talking around 1,300 people. And then if you actually look at them and those who would probably be candidates to be in a clinical trial based on what their lung function is, only about 850 folks. We're talking, it's not simple is the bottom line. It's going to be tricky to be able to bring those people into clinical trials. And then finally, only about 20% of them have actually had clinical trial experience in the last 10 years. And why is that? Because they weren't candidates for modulators. And that was what so much of the research was. So they're just not as familiar with being in research as some people with CF in the past. But we have lots of shots on goal. And the first thing I'm going to show you is some data that has been generated by this company called SpliceSense. And this is that ASO approach that I was telling you about. And it's basically, it's an inhaled treatment once a week. And it really only works for one mutation, okay? It's very mutation specific, and that's its name there, which we'll have a test later on and make sure everybody knows exactly what it is. But the 3849 plus 10 KB C to T. Anyway, you got that? We're going to have T-shirts that are going to be in the back if you'd like that. But it's not. We're talking about 400 or 500 people in the U.S. who have this mutation, just to give you numbers. And a lot of those people actually, their other CF-causing mutation, they can be treated with Trikafta or other modulators. But just to kind of give you a sense of things. But what this does, it fixes a step between the gene and the protein. And where I'm going with this is the problem with this mutation is basically a gene is a long, complicated code, and it sort of gets cleaned up and shortened into a simple code that the body then uses to make a protein. And that step between the long, complicated and the shortened, that's called splicing. And they basically sort of clean things up, make it smaller, tighter, and then it goes and gets turned into the protein. And with this mutation, that sort of splicing step just is not very efficient. And so the problem, what it translates into, these people make a normal CFTR, they just don't make much. They may make 5–10% of normal. The CFTR itself, it works. You just don't have enough around. And modulators help, but they don't fix that underlying problem. A modulator might increase your protein's activity from, like, let's say you start at 10%, and let's say you have 10% of normal CFTR in this person. And if you give them a modulator, you can maybe push it up to 15 or 20%, but it's still much, much lower than what they need to have. What this sort of ASO approach does was actually makes the splicing normal, and it pushes the amount of that CFTR they have up into the normal range. So it's kind of a different approach, if that makes sense. And what I'm showing you on the right side is data that they presented at the end of last year in a study that we're supporting. These are super small numbers. We're literally talking 6 people who got active drug and 2 got placebo. So small numbers, but small population, so that's just reality. And what we're looking at is lung function over time. And they're basically getting a weekly dose of this. And the low dose in the blue, we're looking at their lung function improvement over the span of about 10 weeks. And you can see there's this slow, gradual improvement. And then as you go to the next dose up, you actually get that similar improvement, but it comes on a lot faster. And so this, honestly, is the first time ever that we have shown, or that it has been shown, that an inhaled genetic therapy approach can actually improve lung function in people with CF. So I was asked yesterday, kind of a bold question, do you think we can have a cure for CF in 5 years? And I said, I see data like this, maybe not everybody, but I think I'm optimistic. I think something like this could work for a lot of people. It's not universal. I think I hopefully heard that. The point is, it tells me that this approach actually might make sense. And so, anyway, that's why I'm excited about this. And more to come. We're gearing up for a larger, longer study, and we'll hopefully have that off the ground by this summer. So, hopefully that sends a little message of excitement. Now, here comes the science. All right, we'll keep that short. What are we talking about here? These are the 2 gene therapy studies that I mentioned. One was, Mike mentioned yesterday, 4D. They're basically have an approach where they use something called a adeno-associated virus, or AAV, to basically carry essentially a normal copy of the CFTR gene to go and be in the cells, and the cells can use that for the life of the cell. And on the other side is another company, their name is Crystal, and they're using a different virus approach to do the same general idea, put in a normal copy of the CFTR gene in airway cells. And so what we're looking at here, these people who were in this study, just to show you what the dedication that they have, they underwent bronchoscopy. I don't know if people know what that is, but they take a scope, they go down in the lungs, they look, and they take little tiny snippets of tissue to look and see if that gene that we've delivered is actually there. And on the left side, we're looking at 2 doses, and these are those little snippets of tissue. And the brown is CFTR. These are they use slightly different methods. But what you can see, the high dose to the low dose, you can see that there is some brown in the cells, and those kind of up near the top, those are the cells that are sort of facing the airway, if that makes sense. And on the far right is an example of a person without CF. So the brown staining is pretty subtle, is the point. So what that means is we're actually getting that gene into the cells, and those cells are turning it into protein. On the right side, it might be a little easier to see. What we're looking at is one of those little snippets of tissue on the left, and it uses a different stain, but the cells that we're interested in on the left side, they're those kind of purple guys that you can see little fingers sticking up. Those are called cilia. And then on the right, as you move over to the right, these are basically same general architecture, if that makes sense, but they're stained in different ways. And the blue is looking at the nucleus of all those cells. The red is looking for the CFTR. And then you put those 2 pictures together, and that's what that merges. And basically, that red is telling us that CFTR is in those cells. And so both programs, different approaches, are showing that we can deliver a gene that turns into a CFTR protein. Now the question is, can we get the dose right, and can we get it far enough down into the lungs to be beneficial? So another reason I'm optimistic. So hopefully I'm sending the message of, it's not all science fiction. I think things are actually moving pretty quick in this field, even though you may not. Yes, Sadie?
When you mean inhaled, is that once a day, twice a day? Do we know yet, or is it like a?
It depends. Each one of those has a different dosing frequency. The ASO approach, that first one I showed you, that's once a week. The 4D molecular, the 4D, that second one, that's once a year. And then the other one, Crystal, is about once a week also. So it depends. Yep.
So with the CFTR modulators that are having an effect, would you expect that over time, because they are functioning better, that you get deeper penetration into the lung?
Yeah, exactly. We believe it's a little different than a modulator. When you take a modulator, it's a pill. That pill, the drug goes everywhere in your body, different levels, but it's everywhere. And so you get a really fast effect. We know that CFTR modulators make your sweat test normal within 2 days. It's amazing, This is very different. You got to inhale it. It's got to get past the mucus and the infection and all that stuff. So we believe actually over time you're going to see more benefit as you sort of clean things out, if that makes sense. And I think it kind of looked like that when I look at that picture from the first study. It took a few weeks before we really saw the full benefit. So it's kind of apples and oranges, to be honest with you, how these are going to work. And I think we're learning from the modulator studies the level we can aim for, but it probably isn't going to get there at the same time course, if that makes sense. So what else are we doing to sort of support these types of studies? Again, I mentioned the numbers of people available to be in these studies is not large, and so we have to be a little bit creative in how we can design our studies to be able to support a bunch of different programs. And one way to do that is have less people on placebo, meaning less people on inactive drug, and actually share data across those different programs to be the controls. And that's a study that we're doing. It's called REACH. We're basically enrolling people with CF who are not on modulators and gathering their data over a year in a very sort of rigorous way that like you would do with a clinical trial. And then we can take that data and apply it to all of these different programs to be that sort of control, comparative group, if that makes sense. And that study is going like gangbusters. Oops, gonna go, maybe I can't. Let's try this guy. That way? No. Any chance I can get a advance here? Well, I see it. Let's try that one. Hang on. That work? Oh, there we go. Did you guys get it? Okay, now I think we got it. So this is the REACH study. We're looking at enrollment over time. And again, the general concept, research-grade data for modulator untreated people. That control data is used across all these different programs. And this is actually an out-of-date slide from 2 weeks ago. We've now enrolled 209 people with a goal of enrolling 400. And you can see the breakdown. It's about 2/3 people who are not eligible and 2/3 of people who, 1/3 of people who are in this study who are not tolerant. And bottom line is, both of them are very, very similar, honestly. If you have CF and you're not on a modulator, it doesn't, your disease looks pretty similar between the two. So it's moving really, really fast, and we're really excited. And when we built this airplane, as we built this airplane and we flew it, we really didn't know if this was going to really happen, but we are thrilled to see that the CF community has really embraced this study and is really making it possible to advance a number of different genetic-based therapy programs simultaneously. All right, let's go back. Yeah?
Is REACH going across all those?
Do I know?
Is the REACH study going across all those
Different? Yes, yes. In principle, they're going to be the control group to every one of those others, all those genetic-based therapy studies. So one control group, 5, 6 programs, as opposed to program A, control group A, program B, control group B, program C. So, yeah.
So in August, Jake's going to join?
Yeah, you're on it. Got to be 12 at this point. That's all.
There's 12 on
Oh, fantastic. Yay. That's awesome. Congratulations. All right. And thank you. And you can talk to Katie about that study in just a moment. And then I was just going to give you some updates of other studies and progress that's been made in different modulators and how they're different therapeutics, one first being modulators. We know that modulators now for children who have gating mutations, kind of rare mutations, is now approved down to age 1 year. We know that now Trikafta, that's ETI, is now available down to age 2, and they're starting to push the boundary below that. We do know that ETI, when started in kids who were 6 to 11 years old, they actually know their sweats. In the studies that we've done, everybody has a sweat below the diagnostic cutoff, which is pretty amazing. So it's not normal, but it's definitely outside the CF range. And then we do know that people over the age of 12 who've been taking modulators, they continue, their rate of exacerbations actually continues to be lower out now, about almost pushing 3 years. So definitely giving us good data there. A couple other things, again, Vertex is bringing along follow-along modulators. Those are kind of getting started right now. But we do know with the lift trek, which I think is kind of interesting, that plus Trikafta, the FDA has recently approved 303 mutations to be on the label. So it goes above and beyond those that were actually in the clinical trials. And then finally, I know that Mike mentioned Sionna. This is another program we're excited about, which is now entering phase 2 studies in people with CF. So these are actually moving quite quickly and continue to sort of push the boundary of what a modulator can do for those who can benefit. Switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about anti-infectives. We know that that people with CF, not universally, but good quarter to a third of people with CF are still dealing with chronic infections, even with modulators present. And there's a couple things I thought I would highlight that would be just to kind of give you a sense of where things are. The first is a company that's called Clairmedics, and they are developing an approach to break up something called biofilms. And this was, again, mentioned by Mike yesterday. Think of a biofilm as just, it's basically bacteria release this gunk that sort of covers them, encases them, and keeps antibiotics from getting in to do their job. And a lot of bacteria do this. You know, we know Staph does this. We know Pseudomonas does this. We know NTM does this. So it's shared by a lot of different bacteria. You know, certainly nuances, but often a similar approach to try to fight off infection or try to fight off antibiotics, be resistant. And what this drug is trying to do is basically break up those biofilms so that antibiotics can go in and do their job. So antibiotics can get back in there and kill the bacteria that are causing the trouble. And so this was a small study. It had about 42 people enrolled. They all had chronic Pseudomonas infection. This was a single IV dose, and this basically over the span of a month, after that one dose, they both reduced the amount of bacteria in their sputum, in their lungs, by about a third, and the inflammation dropped by about 75%. And so this is really a cool, very different approach that we think could extend well beyond Pseudomonas. So keep an eye out. You know, they're figuring out what that next study looks like. And you could see a world, though, that this might be something like a subcutaneous shot three or four times a year that helps to sort of keep your biofilms at bay. That, again, that's you know, everything goes right, but that's kind of the vision in the long run. Yes.
Is antibiotic resistance tied more to the biofilm than the actual resistance of the bug inside?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Some bacteria will develop a very sort of their own resistance to an antibiotic. Basically, like they might make an enzyme that chews up the antibiotic. That's one approach. And this, though, is a different type of resistance, and this resistance is shared by a lot of different bacteria. So will it overcome all resistance? No, but it will overcome one of the common ones that cuts across a lot of different types of bacteria. On the right side, I just wanted to highlight a study called SEND. And SEND is a study in which it's trying to address the question of how do we detect infection in people with CF when they're not really able to generate sputum. We know this has been a good problem, but a problem that has kind of happened in the post-modulator world, and are there ways that we can better detect? And so we're working with now definitely three, and maybe even a fourth company, to basically get them specimens from people with CF and chronic infections. And those specimens would include like sputum, breath, blood, and urine. And then they're testing different ways to sort of match what's detected in the sputum to what they can detect in the blood, your breath, or sputum. And so this study is just kicked off this year, and we basically take the specimens, we send them to the company tests their different modalities, and we hope this is going to be a new way that we might be able to detect either even clinic or in home that you could be monitoring for infections by a real simple way. So more to come, but very excited by this. This has really picked up speed over the last year. Yes?
Still enrolling the SEND one?
Yeah, we literally just got opened that for enrollment this year. So happy to connect you with active sites. So another couple of things I'll mention have to do with anti-inflammatories. We know in the lungs of people with CF, because of chronic infection, the body comes to try to deal with that infection, and that inflammation over time is a good thing, keeps the bacteria from taking over. The bad thing, it can injure the lungs and damage things. And so it's kind of a balance, but we do know that reducing inflammation in CF can actually really help preserve lung function. And so how we're really approaching this is we're starting to look at ways that we can combine people with CF with other lung problems. And one of the hallmarks of CF is something called bronchiectasis. You may have heard that term, but basically that's an airway that's scarred and kind of gotten dilated. It no longer is tight and firm and able to move mucus out. It's kind of saggy, if that makes sense, and it's really hard for the mucus to be cleared, and bacteria can just kind of set up shop and stay. And that problem is not just a CF problem. There's actually a lot of people without CF who can have that. The cause is different, but the consequences are kind of a similar problem with the airways. And so we're starting to bring CF and non-CF people together in common clinical trials to help develop these types of symptomatic therapies. And one of the companies that's doing that is Boehringer Ingelheim. Their study is called Airtivity. They're enrolling almost, 1,600 people, of which about 300 of them have CF and 1,300 don't. And if you do the math, that's a really efficient way to advance a new therapeutic that could benefit people with CF, not relying 100% on people with CF. So that study is going gangbusters, and that's going to complete enrollment by July. It literally is enrolled in almost 6 months and as fast as any study I've ever seen. So keep your eye out. Very exciting, different way, though, to develop new treatments for people with CF. CF-related diabetes. Hi, Sandy. Here we are again. This is bubbled up to be one of those sort of 4 major priorities for the next 5-year strategic plan, as was mentioned by Mike last night. And I just wanted to highlight you a couple of things. On the left side, that figure is showing the impact of modulators on diabetes for different groups of people. And each one of those bars is all the people who are in the study called PROMISE who were monitored for diabetes things. And we have a baseline, we have measurements at 1 to 1.5 years, and then we have measurements at 2 to 2.5 years. And each of the different colors is sort of a different level of glucose, the word we say is glucose tolerance, basically, or glucose management, if that makes sense. The blue at the bottom is the number of people with CF-related diabetes. The green is people who have a little bit of problems, don't have diabetes, but are close. The brown is kind of those who have early signal of diabetes, and then the top, the kind of orangey peach, I guess you would say, is basically normal. And as you look over time, there's just not big changes, I think is the point. You know, the distribution of these different levels of sort of how your glucose is managed and so forth stays about this, you know, bounces a little bit, but by and large it stays the same. And so I think it tells us modulators, they help a little, but they don't really fix the problem of CF-related diabetes. On the right side is just a quick little picture of the device that's being studied in this bionic pancreas study. Again, this is a program that basically connects the glucose monitor to an insulin pump and helps to automate some of that blood glucose management, and less of you doing all the carb counting and more over time, particularly of the device doing that work. And so they've enrolled 112 out of 150. Once they get to 150, 6 months till the study is done, a little bit of cleanup, go to the FDA. Hopefully it worked. I think it will, but hopefully. And then we would hopefully be able to have this on the label in the not too distant future and available for people with CF-related diabetes. Yes, Sandy?
My son was the first person enrolled in that study, and he loved that pump so much that we got our doctor to write a very lovely letter.
Yep.
And it was approved. He doesn't have type 1, but
Yep.
he got approved for the bionic, and it's changed his life.
Yep, it is approved for type 1 diabetes, and that's been great. And we're called as a fast follow. We're trying to follow right behind them and sort of build on what their success was and apply it to CF. So, thank you, Sandy, for the I've been there experience. You saw this slide yesterday, and you're like, what am I looking at? Well, most of what I've talked about to this point is sort of connects to that therapeutic slide. This is all a lot of the studies, and it's actually not all of them, but it's a lot of the high priority studies funded by the CF Foundation to address questions, problems for people with CF that are not about developing a new drug. And they're in lots of different groupings. We talked about the REACH study early on. You can see that connects to genetic therapies. CFTR modulators, we have a lot of studies that have been looking at different populations and how modulators impact their CF. Mucus clearance, inflammation, infection, and again, and you'll see also there's some duplication because sometimes one study is trying to answer questions across 3 or 4 different domains. But I guess the message is there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we've not done a great job sharing with you, and so we're going to be trying to do that in a more proactive way going forward, so you realize that we're really trying to tackle questions that we think are really important to people with CF. And honestly, most of these studies are directly derived from the CF community. Yep, sure.
Yeah, so you said there's a lot going on in the background. If you were to put a number on the studies that were done, if you could, what would that look like?
Total number of studies being done. Yeah, you'd think I would know that off the top of my head, wouldn't I? I would say, these are the big multi-center studies that we're doing. And so of those that are not new therapies, I would say we're doing probably simultaneously 12 to 15 right now. And then there are a lot of small, what we call single center studies, which then sometimes grow into bigger studies. And from that, there's another probably 30 or 40. So it's really robust. There's a lot going on sort of if there are questions around specific topic areas, obviously can get that information and help you better understand. So, but a great question. Yes.
Came a little late, so if we discussed this.
Yeah.
My apologies. I have two kids with CF.
Mhm.
A boy who's a man,
And
31.
Yep.
And a daughter who's 28.
yes.
Very, very different manifestations.
Yeah.
Despite having the same parents and the same genotypes virtually.
Yeah, you would think, right?
Is there any twin and siblings?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I've never heard of one, and I'm just curious as to why. if
Why are
they're
they so different?
or they're not.
Yeah.
Kids could be just opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question is, how do two kids in the same family, same mutations, have completely different disease courses? And I've seen that many times, to be honest with you. There was a large study that was conducted, and this was probably 15 years ago, so it's actually before modulators, to be honest with you, but it really was called a twin SIB study, and it really looked at what are the contributors to different paths for people with CF, even though their mutation or the rest of their genetic background is the same. And what we learned, just in broad strokes, is that genetics are responsible about 50% of the differences, and then environment is responsible for about 50% of the differences. So living in the same environment, presumably, the same house, so all that, I would presume just it has to do with those other, the other genetic differences that they have. You know, and every time you have a child, it's kind of a bit of a roll of the genetic dice, exactly how they're all going to come together to be that person, and they're probably represent those. And happy to give you a little more depth in that. So there are a bunch of these things that have been found.
Encourage you to continue thinking about doing that. If
Yeah.
you haven't done it in 15 years.
Yeah.
God,
Yeah, well, it's a different disease, exactly, you know, now. Yeah, it's a great point.
and it's quite different.
Uh-huh. And it can also identify, you know, places where we might be able to intervene. If it's your differences, you have a stronger inflammation problem, or you're more susceptible to a bacteria problem, so it's a great point.
I think gender plays a
Yeah,
bigger
absolutely.
role
Yep.
than maybe you thought.
Yes, no, there's definitely been a long-standing difference in outcomes between women and men with CF. Women, you have had a shorter lifespan. It's less of a difference with modulators, but that being said, there's still this difference that remains. So, fair questions, and thank you. So this is, I'm going to take just a quick look into infections in people who have been put on CFTR modulators. And this is from a big study called PROMISE. It's been going on for almost 5 years. And what we're looking at is what happens to the level of Pseudomonas infection in people with CF and who went into the study who had that infection once they start a modulator. And what we see is each one of those gray dots is a different person, and the red dot's the average. And what you see is that when people start modulators, there is a drop of about 100-fold in the amount of bacteria that's in their lungs. So it goes down a lot. But if you look a little more deeply, what I hope maybe you see is it's not like everybody goes down. It's like some go down, some stay pretty steady, you know? I mean, there's a lot of people above that line, if that makes sense. And again, and what was interesting about 30% of people, they actually we couldn't detect Pseudomonas in them, while some other folks, they still had very high levels. And so why I bring that up is there was a follow-up study that recently was submitted for publication, and I'm just going to take you a little, I know, what am I looking at here? Well, basically what this study does, it was a real in-depth study of a total of 9 people, okay? So not big numbers, but what they did, each one of those 9 people volunteered to undergo a bronchoscopy. And during that bronchoscopy, they looked in 5 parts of the lung. Our lungs are made, basically the right lung has 3 lobes and the left lung has 2 lobes. And what they did is they went to each one of those different lobes and literally with a different bronchoscope, so we were really just looking at each of the different parts of the lung, okay? And they looked at the amount of bacteria they had before they started Trikafta and after they had been on Trikafta for over a year. And what they found of those 9 people, on the left side, what you're looking at is the kind of the pre-level and the post-level. And the point is, 3 of those people, they could no longer detect Pseudomonas anywhere. It was undetectable. While on the right side, those 6 other people, kind of the pre-post, it bounced around, you know? It was high, and then it went down some, went up some. But the point is, it's sort of almost like there's 2 routes that you can kind of go with this. It kind of seems, and again, early days, but people either clear it completely or don't. once they start Trikafta, and probably the same thing for Liftrek. And why that's so interesting or important is now it says, well, what's different about those people who are able to clear? Is it the bacteria, or is it their actual ability to deal with the bacteria? And so, this is one of those questions that we didn't see coming. I'll be honest with you. I figured, a damaged part of the lung is going to hold on to its infection. It didn't really look like that. It looked like you were either able to get rid of it all, or you weren't. And so that just is one of those experiments that tells us, okay, we got to think differently about how we deal with chronic infection, people, CF, in the post-modulator world. Yep.
Any similar studies with other?
Bacteria. Yeah, they looked with something called Stenotrophomonas. They've looked at staph. They've looked at Aspergillus, a type of fungus. And so they haven't done well, let me step back. This study also looked at some of these organisms. They didn't have as many simply because the enrollment was for people who had Pseudomonas, and it was only 9 people. But we do have that other data, like the big group study that looked across all those different organisms. But they definitely saw a pattern of some people clear and some people don't, and this is the in-depth study, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
What was the time frame between those?
Yeah, it was about, they had to be at least a year, and it was up to a year and a half. So it was kind of 1 year after starting Trikafta.
I'm not really sure if it could be like just 3, like if your child is not handling modulators well,
Uh-huh.
you can only handle them for 3 months,
Uh-huh.
whether that eradicates it and it's moving through long.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think we are still learning about that. These were people who were adults and had clear-cut established infection, been there for years. A lot of times kids will have sort of what they call intermittent infection. You detect it, you don't. You detect it, you don't.
We had it for NTM.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
A 3-month modulator dose cleared. And
Is that right? Yeah.
we had to come off of it.
I see. And I would presume that he cleared it. Based on this data, if you can extrapolate that to NTM, it's if he should get NTM again, knock on wood, he won't. Yeah, it probably is not the old one. It would be something new. So anyway, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
So what you're saying is it didn't matter degree of bronchiectasis or whatever. I mean, I know it's a small population.
Right.
But bronchiectasis or not that advanced was not a variable that was a determinant.
Exactly. The level of underlying damage was not the driver of whether you did or didn't clear.
You know,
I know, it doesn't make sense.
Logically, you think, well, if
Yeah.
there's a pocket, then how does
Can-
it really put it so bad?
Exactly. That's kind of what we went in expecting. Yeah, you clear it in some, everybody clears it in some places, and there's a few places that we can't. It was like, actually, it was person-specific, not disease, if that makes sense. Yes?
Is immune deficiency a part of this? So my son has
Uh-huh.
immune deficiency. We're on IVIG, and so I'm just curious if maybe some of that is at play as well.
Could be, yeah. I mean, we do know that I guess I would say that my presumption is the difference in underlying immune makeup may be a big contributor about whether a modulator in the setting of a chronic infection is able to clear. But we don't know that for sure, to be honest with you, but it's a great question. Moving to a different part of your body, what we're looking at is the pancreas, and basically how well do modulators help keep the pancreas making pancreatic enzymes. As we've heard today, handful of enzymes, boyfriend's pocket, whatever, at all times, but know that enzymes are just a part of life at the moment with CF, and we're beginning to look at modulators in younger populations, getting enough information to see, can we actually maintain, even restore the pancreatic function if we start modulators early enough. So what we're looking at, I know there's kind of 2 things here, but I kind of focus on the left side. This is looking at a marker in poop and fecal stuff. It's called elastase. Elastase is an enzyme that we can measure that comes from the pancreas. And what we're looking at is the level of fecal elastase for people with CF when they started modulators at different ages. So the first one is looking at kids who started modulators in the first year of life, 4 to 12 months. The next is looking at ivacaftor and also Orkambi in kids ages 1 to 2. And then you're looking a little further on ivacaftor, Orkambi, Trikafta in kids ages 2 to 5. And what you can see is that being on ivacaftor at a very young age, which is a highly effective modulator, actually maintains a high level of fecal elastase, which suggests to us that actually being able to start a highly effective modulator at a young age has the potential to preserve your pancreas. And that, if that holds, would be huge for people, and could really dramatically change the needs for people as they go forward. So we are trying to get modulators in younger populations, in a safe way, and this kind of data has really informed us as to why that might make sense. I'm going to talk about a couple of more studies, and then I'm going to pass the baton to Katie. First, you've heard probably a couple of times about this study called Retrial, and Retrial basically is a mental health focused study. It also includes looking at liver health too, and it's basically for people who have discontinued Trikafta or lowered the dose and choose to switch over to a Liftrec. And basically we're monitoring both mental health outcomes and liver test outcomes. You can kind of have either one of those reasons to be stopping or lowering your dose, and monitoring it really carefully and sort of better understanding sort of some of those reports of brain fog and so forth that people have really described in a subset of people with CF who've been on modulators. And this study is plugging along very well. It's close to halfway to full enrollment, and we're hoping, knock on wood, we'll have it fully enrolled by the end of this year. And it's tied, obviously, to how quickly people choose to go onto a Liftrec. That has been kind of percolating along, but seems to be picking up. And so as people are switching over, we'll be continuing to advance that study. Another one I want to just highlight has to do with the risk of GI cancers and stool testing. And I'm looking at my colleague Milton shaking his head, and we have a confirmation of your suspicion. So we do know that people with CF are at much higher risk for GI cancers. And Al spoke to this yesterday about sort of the need to screen for cancer in younger populations for people with CF, and particularly in the transplant population. We know the prep is rough. My father died of colon cancer. I've had many a scope, and I've had many a clean out, and I don't love it, but I do it. And I've been told, not having personally experienced it, that it's twice as bad for people with CF because it's twice as long and it's much more onerous. And so, as you might guess, that's kind of a disincentive to getting colon cancer screening. Yes?
Why is it so much more?
It's Milton, you might be able to speak to this, but I would say it's just thick mucus of the GI tract just doesn't clear as well. And
Now after,
Have we looked at the people on the modulators, though? I would think that people on the modulator might have a better,
yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if it's certainly possible that they haven't caught up with the modulators, if that makes sense. It's a great question. Yes. Yep.
So, like 20-year-olds have done it, and they said, boy, you feel great after.
It is true. I'm like, woo. So there's that. You gotta, accentuate the positives, but.
there's always propofol.
Yes. Yeah. There's a. Yeah. Well, so anyway, but we know that GI cancer screening for people with CF is low, and it needs to be better. And one of the sort of lingering question is, could we get away with stool testing? We see our Cologuards and things like that advertised, and they were, to be honest with you, they were not designed for a CF population. They were designed for the general population who don't have that higher risk. That being said, to answer the question and to provide people with data, we did compare stool testing with what was seen on colonoscopy, basically, for people with CF. And what I'm showing you is the enrollment chart, and the red is actual. It went very fast, and that just represents this as an important question. People wanted to be part of it, and you can see that we enrolled about 360 people, of which they had sort of analyzed stuff, about 250 that they can compare, had all the data they needed. They found the sensitivity about 27%. What that means is how well could the stool test identify a polyp or a precancerous lesion, and it was not very good. And go ahead. Yep.
Do we know whether there's more de novo cancer as opposed to adenomas from
Yeah.
We need a timeline for that.
Yeah, that would be a longer, bigger study is the question. So we are the caveat is we're sort of relying on an adenoma, which is pre-cancer, as sort of a marker for actual cancer. So that's definitely a limitation of the study.
Cologuard really was geared to looking for
Yeah.
cancer, early cancer detection.
Yeah.
Because adenomas are small. I mean, for people that don't know, they're small, slow growing, and they don't necessarily give enough data in the stool, be it blood,
Yep.
hemoculture, which is old school,
Yep.
and or the Cologuard fancy DNA testing.
Yeah.
So that's why I wasn't surprised that that was. gonna be
Yeah,
the
and the perfect study, it could have gone on for 10 years, and we sort of cut the difference. But I think that what we tried to do is just sort of provide people some data when they're having that conversation, and say, you know, we just, there's some data that suggests it doesn't perform as well. It's not perfect, I get it.
And the clinical centers are, I think we talked about this offline. The clinical centers are monitoring so that we'll have that longitudinal data.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mass polyps and cancers.
Exactly, yes, and we can pick up that type of information through our registry and kind of tease out those relationships. But it was one of those things that people just wanted information on and said, all right, let's do this and get it to us. Another study that is really looking at sort of GI nutrition, again, I've mentioned on a couple of occasions before, is called STRONG, and it really is trying to better define what nutrition looks like for people with CF. And, you know, as was mentioned yesterday, almost 50% of people with CF now are struggling with either overweight or obesity. So it's becoming more like the rest of us, to be honest with you. And BMI is not just, it's a pretty crude measurement. So this is looking at a variety of other measures that really help us better understand what a healthy nutrition looks like, and that's coupled with what we could actually use in clinical trials. So that study is very close to completing enrollment, and very excited. This is really one of those big forays outside of the respiratory system, because we realize that is actually the bigger concern for people with CF these days. Two more things, and then to Katie. One is modulators in pregnancy. We've heard a little bit about this. This study was looking at women with CF who were pregnant and monitoring their pregnancy journey, many of which stayed on modulators. The other study I'm going to talk about is for people who are carrying a fetus that has CF. So this is mom's CF. 300-ish enrolled. You can see the births. 86% of people stayed on modulators through pregnancy. And the good news is it appears to have been safe. You know, that's always a question whenever you're taking a drug during pregnancy. Is this safe? Is this for me and for my baby? And certainly the complications were no worse, and arguably, you know, the fact that so many were on modulators, they actually did somewhat better. But I would say that we're still following to confirm that the babies have done fine. They're going to be followed for 2 years. And so, but really providing some of that fundamental data about pregnancy and modulators, because we know that's going to be the reality of a lot of people with CF in the future. And the last thing I just wanted to mention was real-world fetal therapy. You know, taking that a step beyond, not just treating moms with CF, but actually treating fetus with CF, even though the mom's a carrier. And there have been some reports out there in the literature of people who have prescribed modulators to women with CF pregnant with a CF fetus. And on the left side, there were a report of 6 of 8 infants who had of 8 moms who were treated with modulators who had infants with meconium ileus detected by ultrasound. 6 of them resolved by the modulator. And so, not a big number, but really helping us think about how we can really study this to show it's beneficial during pregnancy. And as you can see, so far, it seems to be well tolerated, but we would like to build a bigger, better study, and that's what the PROTECT study is going to do, is really to do that observational study and really have the data in hand to say, okay, here's the safety during and also the benefit that we could see of resolving meconium ileus. So I'm going to pass this on to my colleague. Her name is Katie Howe, and she's going to talk about all the wonderful ways that people can connect to clinical trials. So thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Katie. Bring this down a little. I'm quite short. So as we mentioned earlier, my name's Katie Howe. I'm the clinical trial navigator for the CF Foundation. A little bit about my background. Prior to taking on this role almost 3 years ago, I was a CF research coordinator for almost 7 years at 2 large institutes. And so this July, it'll actually be 10 years that I've been involved in CF clinical research. I'm also a family member of people who have passed from CF, and I also have friends that have a child with CF. So I attended my first CF fundraiser when I was 18 months old, and so I have known CF in many different capacities my entire life. My fun fact is, like JP, I'm also from the Midwest, grew up on a sweet corn farm in Michigan, and that is what put myself and my siblings through college. And so we sold sweet corn on a roadside stand at farmers markets every summer, and that's how we raised money for college tuition. So out of curiosity, how many of you have actually heard of me or the Clinical Trial Navigator? Yay, well, you two don't count.
We're making progress.
We're making progress. So JP's goal when I first started this was that everyone needed to know who I am or my name, and so we're getting closer and closer. So what can I do for you, and what is, or who is the Clinical Trial Navigator? So I can provide personalized one-on-one assistance to people with CF and their families, or any community member who has questions about clinical trials. I can help you understand the clinical trial process. I can answer questions about trial logistics, such as participation, what those assessments may look like during the study, travel, reimbursement, safety, expenses. I can help you use the clinical trial finder to find a trial that you or somebody may be interested in and that they may be eligible for. I can also provide personalized reports of clinical trials you may be eligible for. So if somebody reaches out to me and they say, these are my mutations, this is my lung function, I can go through and look at all of our trials that are currently enrolling and see what they may be eligible for, and then put them in direct contact with a research team. And like it says here, I can facilitate contact between anyone and a research site that's enrolling for a particular trial. You'll see a few ways that you can get in touch with me. So the email address listed here, and then the 2 QR codes on the right-hand side will actually take you to the Clinical Trial Navigator page on the CFF webpage. And it's a simple form that you can fill out. It goes, once you submit it, it goes directly to my email, to that Trial Navigator email, and then I will respond within 2 business days, or about 48 hours. Also, I like to note that Spanish services are available upon request. So the 2 QR codes, the top one's in English, the bottom one's in Spanish. And then if anyone does require Spanish services, or they request them, I use the Compass case managers that are bilingual, and we can have an audio or video call in Spanish upon request. As I mentioned, I can help utilizing the Clinical Trial Finder. So this is a fantastic resource provided by the foundation that allows the CF community to search for clinical trials that they may be interested in, or that are located near you or them. The QR code will take you directly to the Clinical Trial Finder, or the website is listed here. And then on the Clinical Trial Finder, there's actually like a tutorial video that'll walk you through how to use the Finder, or you can reach out to me directly and I can walk you through it. We can get on a video call, I can pull it up on my screen, and I can help you navigate it that way as well. So this is just a screenshot of what the Finder looks like. I like to use the filters because it's a much easier way to find what you're looking for. So you can search by age, location, mutation, how far you're willing to travel, especially if there's not a trial going on at your current care center. You can find trials that are currently enrolling or view results. Not everyone knows that you can actually view results on the Clinical Trial Finder. It's not just the trials that are enrolling. You can contact a research coordinator at an enrolling site for more information about a clinical trial. So if you find a trial you're interested in, you click on that trial, you read a little bit of information about it, you scroll to the bottom, it'll show all the sites that are currently enrolling, as well as the lead research coordinator that you can get in contact with. You can also reach out to me directly, and I can put you in touch with them. Yes?
I'm wondering how, again, because I have one kid from column A and one kid from column B, how do you find that there's a sort of a selection bias, that the sicker patients tend to be more the ones that want to do the clinical trials, as opposed to, like, my son's kind of like, well, why would I want to do that?
Yes and no. It's pretty split.
Like, don't you want both types in these studies?
We do, but it's also up to the person in wanting to participate as well, and where they are. Like, is it feasible for them to participate at that point in time based off of their work schedule, childcare, what's going on in their life? So it's very dependent. We do find that some people that are very, very sick are more encouraged to participate, and then people who are healthy are like, I still want to participate and give forward and give to the community. So it's just very different. I don't know if you want
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to add was it kind of depends on what's being studied. As an example, the anti-inflammatories that I described before, to be in that study, you have to have a history of exacerbations in the last year. So you're sort of identifying people who are having more instability because we think they're the most likely to benefit. So it's a mix. I will say that study we described, REACH, that's a very much an all-comers approach. Sick or well, we'll take anybody, and then kind of after the fact, try to match the folks who are in that study to to the genetic study that's happening, if that makes sense. So different strategies.
You can also sign up for alerts to be notified when new trials are enrolling or when results are available. I really like to make note of this because a lot of times I will have people reach out to me and they're really excited about a press release or like a new upcoming trial that they've heard about, but they can't find it on the clinical trial finder, and it's because it's not ready to enroll, and so sites aren't open to accept patients to participate in those trials. And so this is a really good way for you to immediately get an email notifying you that there is a new trial that is enrolling or results are currently available. You can also sign up for research and care updates. This is simply an email that goes out every so often. I think it's monthly or every few months. I can't remember.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think it's monthly.
I think it's monthly. And this just gives you, again, like a really good overview of what's going on currently with research and care. So the bottom QR code on the left will help you sign up for those email alerts through the clinical trial finder, and the one on the right will take you directly to sign up for research and care updates. This is actually very exciting. This is a new initiative that was launched this year. This is in the first year. It's a pilot program, but we are expanding it moving forward, which we're really excited about. And so why are we doing this and what are research champions? So we know that not every care center has a research team. And we know that they don't all participate in clinical trials or they don't run clinical trials. And so we have 10 research champions right now that are located at care centers that do not conduct research, and their goal is to help engage their community and their care team in research. And so we know that the improved health of most people with CF taking modulators means research isn't always top of mind for care teams, especially if they don't have a research team. And the urgency remains to find a transformative therapy for all, and novel therapeutic trials necessitate increased referrals and care team engagement. So like I said, what are we doing? We're supporting these research champions at care centers whose role is to promote a culture of research by bridging the communication with care teams and people with CF and their families about research. This is actually somebody that is a part of the care team. So it may be a respiratory therapist, it may be a nurse coordinator, it may be one of the physicians themselves, it may be a geneticist. And so it's somebody that's already a part of the care team, but they're taking it upon themselves to help really communicate what research is going on with their patient population. Again, it's also helping build relationships across regions to aid in referrals. So right now we have about what are called regional cooperatives. It's broken up into 20 different regions. And so these research champions help with building those relationships within those care centers and research centers within their regions as well. And so it's just another form of communication, another way for us to get information out about clinical trials and increase engagement. And I believe, we're expanding it to 15 or 20
I think
this
we're actually
year?
pushing it up to at least 20.
Yes.
And we'll see what we got on top of that. So
Which is
I think that's
very-
the next future, having a footprint in more care centers so that they can realizing, identifying people to be in a given clinical trial. We have to have sort of a broad footprint, but we also need to acknowledge that trying to have a full-fledged research center at every care center is probably not feasible. So how do we sort of bridge that gap between the two?
Another really good resource, I always like to mention these because I think we did a fantastic job when we created these. These are just a handful of our genetic therapy resources that are available on the CF Foundation's website. They are also available in Spanish, but there are 3 different handouts. One is Understanding Genetic Therapies. My favorite is the Genetic Therapies in CF, a glossary of key terms. I think we all, especially when we started having conversations about genetic therapies or nucleic acid-based therapies, a lot of phrases are thrown out and we don't always know exactly what it means. So this is a really good glossary that just kind of helps guide that conversation. And then a list of questions to ask before enrolling in a genetic therapy. So this is a list of questions that anyone in the community can take to their provider and say, I want to go over these to see what genetic therapies I may be eligible for or interested or just wanting to learn more about. So clinical trial referrals. Referrals are quite interesting, to say the least, but this is the one way that we are going to get these trials enrolled and for them to be successful. So this occurs when somebody is interested in a clinical trial at a CF center other than their own and is referred to that center for participation. So they are participating in a clinical trial at a CF center that is not their current care center. So how does this work? So typically a conversation is scheduled between the patient, the care team, and the research team to ensure the clinical trial is a match. A medical release form is completed to share medical records with the research team to confirm what we call high-level eligibility criteria. So do they have the right mutation? Do they have FEV? Just a few of those high-level criteria. And then a screening visit is scheduled to confirm full eligibility for the clinical trial. So this is when you will sign a consent form. You'll go through a handful of assessments. All that data is then confirmed by the sponsor, and they say, yep, you're good to go. You can enroll in this trial, and then you can move forward with participating in those research visits. So like I said, if that criteria is met, you'll enroll in the clinical trial and complete research visits at the care center conducting the trial. The biggest question we get is, does care change while participating in a clinical trial at a different care center? No. Your care will remain with your care team, which is very, very important. Care does not change. So you will still have your clinical visits with your care team. You'll do your research visits with the research team at a different center. And we just make sure that that research team, the physician leading the study at the research site, as well as the care team, are all in good communication. And this is really to ensure health and safety throughout the clinical trial. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm asking so many questions.
You're fine.
That's why we're here.
How is the cost handled for, I mean, if we're talking about young adults who may have limited sick leave because of their illnesses, et cetera, travel, is there any kind of coverage for that that's being provided?
So you do.
20s and 30-year-olds who.
Yeah, a lot of people do have to take time off of work. I know for children, we do write school excuses, but the travel is covered by the company, the drug company. They are reimbursed for their time when they do participate in those visits. Meals are accommodated for, lodging is covered, and so a lot of it's that upfront cost, but then it's reimbursed, or we can make sure that, if we're having to buy a plane ticket, reserve a hotel room, we can do that. Most of the drug companies have a travel agency that they work with, and then we can go through that way so they don't have that cost.
Yeah, I call it pre-reimbursement, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Pay for some of these things up front so these people are not out
Out of
money,
pocket.
right?
Yeah. And then with that reimbursement, it's usually on like a credit card, yeah, and then you just fill it every single time somebody brings in receipts, put in the mileage, their meals, all that, and so it's just reloadable. You're welcome. So why are these clinical trials important? Are these referrals important? So all trials require specific amounts of time, equipment, and research team members for the trial to be successful. Therefore, not all research teams can conduct the same clinical trials. This is especially the case for genetic therapy trials, or as also known as NEBTs. And due to this, referrals are very important to connect people with CF to trial sites with the capabilities to safely execute the studies. So to date, we do track all those referrals every single year. To date, approximately a third of people with CF enrolled in a genetic therapy trial have been referrals. So these are people participating in these genetic therapies at a site other than their own. And in 2025, 82 people were referred for clinical trials and 63 were successfully enrolled. And so I will say that compared to last year, we had 41 that were referred and only 33 that were enrolled when it came to referrals. So we've drastically increased that referral connection. Lastly, I really like to talk about community voice. This is a great way to also get involved, whether you are, extremely experienced in participating in clinical trials or not. Community voice is just a really, really great way to have your voice heard, whether it's it's about research or it's about care. These are just different workshops and ways that the community input can drive our research, but it's a really good way to get involved. I really like to, for people who may be extremely healthy and they don't want to necessarily participate in a trial, this is something that they can participate in, still have their voice heard. And on the opposite end, say somebody's not really interested in participating in a trial right away, or they're not quite ready to participate in a trial, this is another great way to get involved and still, be able to have their voice heard when it comes to research. So lastly, how do you get involved? I know I've covered the majority of this. So if it's at your care center, start a conversation with your provider. First and foremost, always talk to your physician about participating in research. If you do have a research team at your site, to ask to speak to the research team. If it's at a different center, you can use the clinical trial finder to find different trials that are enrolling that you may be interested in. And then you can also reach out to me and I can always help facilitate that. Again, always talk to your provider about participation. But in general, if anyone is looking for basic clinical trial information, you don't know where to begin, don't even know how to navigate the resources, please come to me. That is what my job is for, is to really help you connect with anyone connect with clinical trials and provide any resources that we have available. And I will say, if we don't have the resource available, then we have the means to make that resource available most of the time. So, and like I said, please help shape future projects by joining Community Voice. It's such a wonderful program. And that is all we have. I know we're probably over.
We're a little long, but anyway, we're more than happy to take any questions. I know we've got about 10 or 15 minutes before the next session, but yes, Jamie.
Let's ask you the hard one.
Yes.
So we're in phase 2 trials for a lot of these genetic
Yep.
advances. They've been slowed down. Do we have a timeline we think they'll transition to phase 3?
Yeah, so if anybody didn't hear, we've got a number of phase 2 studies, late phase 1, early phase 2 studies of genetic-based therapies. When we'll be in phase 3. How will I put this? They're all moving at similar but not the same pace. And the two that I kind of showed you today, the 4D molecular and the, what's the other one? Crystal. Yeah, those two. They're both in what are called expansion cohorts right now. And what they're trying to do is demonstrate enough people for a long enough period of time to support going on to a pivotal study. So I would be hopeful that those two studies could have that data accumulated over the next 8 to 12 months. So that's kind of where I'm thinking of those two. The mRNA programs, there's 3 of them. Those ones, 2 of them are also in an expansion right now. So one's called RECODE and the other's called Arcturus. And I know RECODE is actually enrolled, they just enrolled sufficient numbers. I think what I can publicly disclose. They've met their enrollment goal for their expansion cohort. And they're doing a study that goes on for 3 months. So that kind of gives you, we should have a readout on that by the back half of this year, okay? And then the last one, the ASO program, which I know is not for everybody, it's very unique mutation, but that one will be having their expansion cohort begin in the summer. So we're talking months to year, I'm hopeful, obviously everything has to go right, but I think we could have a lot of these have sufficient data over the between now and this time next year.
And with such a small population, will they, I'm hoping,
Yeah.
will they go down?
Yeah, the big question.
Ages, or will they stop at 18?
Yeah, it's a great question. Will they go to 12? It is going to all be about what they call risk-benefit. If there is clear evidence of activity and the side effect profile is low, they probably would actually allow it to go to 12. Yeah, that's it. It's all about informed consent and all those things. But yes, it has to be safe and showing some evidence of benefit before they're going to drop before 18. So, thumbs up, fingers crossed. Thumbs up and crossed. Yes, in the back. Oh, sorry. What? Yeah.
So when we're talking about a cure,
Yes.
are we talking about a cure of the lungs?
Yeah. Cure. No. Cure. Yeah. There's sort of two things. You'll hear something called transformative therapies for the lung. That's kind of what I'm talking about today. I'm hopeful that one of these guys will hit, and those, in best case scenario, could be available within 5 years. You saw one of them, ASO, that looked maybe there, but that's not going to be for everybody. We know that. So at least I think we could have proof of concept that we could see that. A cure means all the parts of your body that express CFTR, and that would require a different type of dosing, which we're doing in preclinical experiments. As you can probably guess, these are a little more complicated than modulators, where they can do everything in a test tube. Some of these involve doing studies in animal models and things like that. So.
Does that mean a different vector too? Lung vector, or would the lung vector be able to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would imagine it would be similar, not the same, to the lung vector. You know, if it turns out there's actually been evidence of, again, maybe it was mentioned yesterday, baby KJ, which was this curative therapy for a person with a metabolic disorder. They basically used editing with a lipid nanoparticle. So it was a lot like our mRNA lipid nanoparticle, but it was adapted to a different cargo, if that makes sense. And so it could do that if it was editing, because editing, you only have to dose it a handful of times, if that makes sense. It's not realistic to dose everybody, 3 times a week with an IV CFTR therapy. So once you get to editing, then we could likely adapt anything we're talking about today, but it would probably have to have a little different flavor to be able to get to all the necessary cells, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Hi, come on in, guys. Thank you.
You guys come